It was a warm, sunny day, the kind of day that made you feel like everything was perfect. The sky was clear, the birds were singing, and the air was filled with excitement. It was graduation day at Northwood High School, and everyone was buzzing with joy and anticipation. The ceremony was set up on the football field. Rows of white folding chairs, a stage decorated with balloons, and a podium waiting for the principal's speech. Families and friends filled the bleachers, cameras ready to capture the moment. As the graduates gathered in their caps and gowns, there was a sense of accomplishment and relief. Years of hard work had led to this moment. They lined up, chatting and laughing, ready to march to pomp and circumstance. But not everything was as perfect as it seemed. In the shadows of the old school building, something lurked. The school, built over 100 years ago, had its share of stories. Stories of ghostly figures seen in the hallways, mysterious sounds echoing at night, and the old, boarded-up basement no one dared to enter. Among the graduates was Sarah. Sarah was different. Quiet and thoughtful, she often spent time alone, preferring books to people. She had always been fascinated by the stories of the school's ghost. She'd read every article, listened to every rumor. As she stood in line, waiting to receive her diploma, she felt a chill run down her spine. The sun was shining, but for a moment it felt like the temperature had dropped. She shivered and looked around. No one else seemed to notice. The ceremony began. The principal spoke, the valedictorian gave their speech, and names were called one by one. As Sarah's row approached the stage, the chill returned, stronger this time. She could see her breath in the warm air. Her heart pounded. When it was Sarah's turn, she stepped onto the stage, her legs feeling like lead. She reached out to take her diploma, and as her fingers touched it, a deafening silence fell over the crowd. The sound of the wind and birds vanished. The world seemed to stop. Then, from behind the stage, a whisper, soft at first, then growing louder. It was calling her name. Sarah. Sarah, she turned, trying to find the source, but saw nothing. Suddenly, the sky darkened. Clouds rolled in, blocking out the sun. The temperature plummeted. People in the crowd started to murmur, looking up at the sky in confusion. The whisper grew louder, now a chorus of voices. Sarah. Come to us, panic gripped her. She dropped her diploma and ran off the stage, towards the old school building. She didn't know why, but she felt drawn to it. She had to find the source of the voices. As she approached the building, the doors creaked open on their own. She hesitated, then stepped inside. The halls were dark, lit only by the dim light coming through the windows. The air was thick with dust and the smell of mildew. She followed the whispers, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. They led her to the basement, the one place she had never dared to go. The door to the basement was ajar, a cold draft seeping through. She pushed it open and descended the creaky wooden stairs. The basement was dark, the only light coming from a single flickering bulb. In the center of the room was a circle of old, wooden chairs. On each chair sat a figure, shrouded in shadow. As Sarah stepped closer, the figures became clearer. They were students, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, their faces pale and eyes hollow. "Welcome, Sarah," they said in unison, their voices echoing off the stone walls. "We've been waiting for you," she stumbled back, her heart racing. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "We are the forgotten," one of them replied. "Students who never graduated. Lost souls trapped here, waiting for someone to set us free." Sarah shook her head. "What do you want from me?" "You are the one," another said. "The one who can break the curse. You must help us." Before she could respond, the ground began to shake. The walls cracked and dust rained down from the ceiling. The figures stood, their forms becoming more solid, more real. "Free us, Sarah," they pleaded. "Release us from this torment." She didn't know what to do. Fear paralyzed her, but deep down she knew she had to help them. She took a deep breath, steadied herself, and stepped into the circle. "What do I need to do?" she asked. The ground shook harder, the whispers now a deafening roar. The figures surrounded her, their hands reaching out. "You must face the past," they said. "Embrace the truth." With that, the room plunged into darkness. Sarah felt herself falling, spiraling into a void. She closed her eyes, bracing for the impact. When she opened them, she was no longer in the basement. She was in a classroom, but it looked different. The desks were old, the blackboard covered in chalk dust. It was the past, the school as it had been decades ago. She saw the students, the same ones from the basement, sitting at their desks. They looked at her, their eyes filled with sadness. "You are the one," they repeated. "You must finish what we started." Sarah walked to the front of the room, her heart pounding. She picked up a piece of chalk and began to write on the board. The letters formed words, and the words formed sentences. She didn't know how she knew what to write, but her hand moved on its own. As she wrote, the air around her shimmered. The students began to glow, their forms becoming brighter. The room filled with light, so bright it hurt her eyes. Then, just as suddenly, it was over. She was back in the basement, the figures gone. The whispers had ceased, replaced by a profound silence. The light returned, and she found herself lying on the floor, surrounded by concerned faces. Her classmates, teachers, and family were there, looking down at her. "Sarah, are you okay?" her best friend, Emily, asked, helping her to her feet. She nodded, feeling dazed but somehow lighter. "I'm fine," she said. "I think it's over." As she walked back to the ceremony, the sun broke through the clouds, shining brighter than before. The air was warm again, and the crowd cheered as she took her place among the graduates. But it wasn't over. That night, as Sarah lay in bed, she heard the whispers again. This time they were clearer. They were begging. "Help us, Sarah. You must help us." Her dreams were filled with visions of the past, of students trapped in the school, unable to leave. She saw their faces, their hollow eyes pleading for freedom. She woke up drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. Determined to end this once and for all, Sarah returned to the school the next day. She went back to the basement, hoping to find answers. The room was empty, but the air was thick with a sense of urgency. She searched the room, looking for clues. Her hand brushed against a loose brick in the wall. She pulled it away, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was an old, leather-bound book. She opened it, the pages filled with handwritten notes and drawings. It was a diary, written by a student who had attended the school decades ago. The entries detailed strange occurrences, students disappearing, and whispers in the night. The last entry was the most chilling. It spoke of a ritual, a way to break the curse. Sarah read the instructions carefully. She needed to gather items that had belonged to the lost students and perform the ritual in the basement. She spent the next few days collecting these items, sneaking into the school at night to avoid detection. When she had everything she needed, she returned to the basement. She arranged the items in a circle and began the ritual. As she chanted the words from the diary, the room grew colder, the shadows deeper. The whispers returned, louder than ever. The figures appeared, surrounding her. This time they looked different. Their faces were clearer, their eyes filled with hope. "Free us, Sarah," they pleaded. "Finish what you started." She continued the ritual, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her heart. The ground shook, the walls cracked, and a blinding light filled the room. The figures began to dissolve, their forms turning to light. As the last words left her lips, the light exploded, filling the room. When it faded, the figures were gone. The room was silent, the air warm again. Sarah collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. She had done it. She had freed them. As she left the basement, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The whispers were gone, the shadows lifted. She knew she had done something important. Graduation day had been more than a milestone for Sarah. It had been a journey, a test of courage and resolve. She had faced the past, embraced the truth, and set the lost souls free. And as she walked away from the school, she knew she was ready to move on, ready to face whatever the future held, knowing she had the strength to overcome anything.